The night Damon Veilcrest rejected Alara Whitcomb, even the moon seemed to hold its breath. In the center of Moon Tribunal Hall, beneath a ceiling of black glass and silver runes, Alara stood alone while every alpha in Silverfang pack watched her, as if she were something left outside in the rain. The ancient hall had been built for sacred vows, for bloodlines joining under the blessing of the moon goddess. But that night its polished stone floor felt more like a courtroom. Torches burned in iron brackets. Fur cloaks brushed against velvet gowns. Whispers moved through the crowd like cold fingers. Alara kept her hands folded at her waist, one thumb pressed against the small silver pendant hidden beneath the collar of her faded blue dress. It was the only thing her mother had left her, a thin crescent twisted around a thorn, so worn from years of touch that the edges had softened. Across from her, Damon Veilcrest looked magnificent in the cruel way powerful men often did when they knew no one would challenge them. He was tall, golden-haired, broad-shouldered, wrapped in the ceremonial black of an alpha who had never been taught to doubt his own worth. Once, when they were children, he had pulled Alara from an icy creek and told her she was too stubborn to drown. She had carried that memory like a secret flame. Tonight, he looked at her as if that boy had never existed. Elder Gideon Ashfall lifted the moonbone staff between them. His voice echoed through the hall, grave and formal. Damon Veilcrest, Alpha of Silverfang, the bond has stirred. Will you accept the Omega marked by fate? A silence fell so sharply Alara could hear her own heartbeat. For one impossible second, she let herself hope. Not for love. She was not foolish enough for that anymore. Only for dignity. Only for him to speak gently. To remember that she had served his household after her mother died, that she had sat beside sick pups through fever nights, that she had never once answered cruelty with cruelty. Damon's jaw tightened. His eyes did not soften. I reject Alara Whitcomb, he said, each word clean and public, as my fated mate. Silverfang needs strength, not pity. I will not bind this pack to a weak Omega with no rank, no influence, and no wolf strong enough to answer mine. The words struck her without leaving a mark anyone could see. A few gasps rose, quickly swallowed by murmurs. Somewhere behind Damon, Brielle Hartwick lowered her lashes, her perfect mouth curved with sympathy too polished to be real. Alara did not look at her. She could not. If she looked anywhere but at Damon's face, she feared she might fall apart. Elder Gideon's expression hardened, not with anger, but with the old weary obedience of a man who had watched tradition wound the innocent and still called it law. Alara Whitcomb, he said quietly, do you accept this rejection? The hall waited. Every alpha waited. They wanted tears. They wanted pleading. They wanted the broken little Omega to prove she deserved the shame they had already given her. Alara felt the pendant warm beneath her dress. So faintly, she thought grief had invented it. She drew one breath. Then another. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but it did not tremble. I accept. A sharp pain opened in her chest, not loud, not dramatic, just deep enough to steal the air from her lungs. Damon exhaled as if freed from a burden. The crowd began to shift, already moving on, already turning her humiliation into tomorrow's gossip. But high above the tribunal dais, beyond the black glass ceiling, the moon slid from behind a passing cloud and poured its pale light directly over Alara. For a heartbeat, every torch in the hall flickered blue. Elder Gideon's staff gave a low, impossible hum. No one spoke of it. Not yet. Damon stepped away from her, toward Brielle, toward applause that did not fully come. Alara lowered her head and walked from the center of the hall, with every stare pressing into her back. She did not know that in the far northern wing, a royal banner had just been raised for the arrival of Alpha King Callan Rookwut. She did not know that the moon goddess had not looked away. She only knew that she had been rejected before them all, and somehow, the night did not feel finished with her. Alara Whitcomb did not remember leaving Moon Tribunal Hall. She only remembered the sound of the great doors closing behind her, sealing away the laughter, the whispers, and the life she had spent years trying to earn. The cold night welcomed her more gently than the wolves she had grown up beside. She walked through the quiet streets of Silverfang with her head lowered, one hand resting against the lunar thorn pendant beneath her dress, as though it were the only steady heartbeat she had left. Warm light spilled from cottage windows along the road. Families gathered around evening meals. Children laughed. Somewhere a mother called her son inside before the frost settled. Alara kept walking. By sunrise, every kitchen table in the territory would know she had been rejected. They would tell the story as though it had always been inevitable. At the edge of White Pine Forest, Mara Whitcomb opened the cottage door before Alara could lift her hand to knock. She had been waiting. Without a word, she wrapped an old wool blanket around Alara's shoulders and guided her inside. The familiar scent of cedar, dried lavender, and fresh bread filled the tiny home. It was the same scent that had welcomed Alara every day since her mother, Adeline Whitcomb, died 12 years earlier. Tonight it only reminded her how tired she was of surviving. "I accepted it," Alara whispered after a long silence. "I thought if I stood with dignity, it would hurt less." Mara brushed a loose strand of ash-brown hair behind Alara's ear. "Dignity never makes cruelty hurt less, child. It only keeps cruelty from changing who you are." Those words settled into the room, but they could not quiet the ache inside Alara's chest. She crossed to the small wooden chest beneath the window, the one she had not opened in months. Inside lay the few things her mother had left behind: a neatly folded linen shawl carrying the faint scent of pine, a pair of worn leather gloves darkened by years of gathering herbs beneath moonlight, and a sealed letter tied with a faded blue ribbon. Alara traced the edge of the envelope with trembling fingers, but did not untie it. "I have never been brave enough," she admitted. Mara looked at the letter for a long moment. "Your mother told me to give it to you only when the moon decided your path." Alara gave a tired smile that held no joy. "Then perhaps it will never be opened." She closed the lid gently, unable to bear another disappointment. As she did, the lunar thorn pendant beneath her dress grew unexpectedly warm. She frowned and lifted it into the candlelight. The silver crescent seemed brighter than before, almost breathing beneath her fingertips. "It did this in the tribunal," she whispered. "Right after I accepted the rejection." The torches turned blue. Mara's face lost what little color remained. For years she had answered difficult questions with careful silence, but tonight that silence trembled. "Some things stay hidden because the world mistakes gifts for prizes," she said quietly. "Your mother understood that better than anyone." Before Alara could ask another question, a frightened knock sounded at the cottage door. Outside stood a young kitchen maid, no older than 11, tears running down her pale cheeks as she cradled her reddened wrist. She had spilled boiling water while helping prepare the tribunal feast, but the healers were still gathered at the hall. Alara forgot her own grief instantly. She knelt in the cold dirt and gently took the girl's shaking hand. "Look at me," she said softly. "Take one slow breath." The child obeyed. As Alara covered the burn with both hands, the familiar gift she had hidden since childhood awakened again. Warm silver light shimmered beneath her fingers. The sharp redness faded. The pain eased until the little girl blinked in surprise instead of fear. Behind Alara, Mara drew a quiet breath. "Go home," she told the child gently, "and tell no one what you saw." The girl nodded and hurried away. Alara stared at her own hands, then at the glowing pendant. "Aunt Mara," she whispered. "Who was my mother, really?" Before Mara could answer, a deep royal horn echoed across the valley. It rolled through White Pine Forest, through the quiet cottage, and straight into Alara's heart. The pendant pulsed once beneath her fingers, stronger than ever before. Mara closed her eyes. "The Alpha King has arrived," she said, "and nothing will remain hidden much longer." The royal horn sounded a second time, lower and heavier than the first, rolling across Silverfong like distant thunder. Even before anyone saw him, conversation stopped. Servants stepped aside without being told. Warriors straightened their backs. The oldest wolves lowered their eyes toward the stone floor, not out of fear alone, but from generations of instinct that recognized a ruler long before he entered the room. Inside Mara Whitcomb's small cottage, Alara stood frozen beside the window, her fingers wrapped around the lunar thorn pendant as it pulsed softly beneath her palm. The warmth no longer felt imagined. It answered the horn as though it had been waiting years to hear that sound. Mara hurried across the room and drew the curtains closed. "Stay away from the moonlight," she whispered. Alara turned toward her. "You keep asking me to trust secrets instead of truth." Mara's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of years she had carried alone. Sometimes truth arrives before people are ready to survive it. Before Alara could answer, firm knocks echoed through the cottage. 3 tribunal guards waited outside, silver cloaks stirring in the cold wind. Elder Gideon Ashfall stood behind them, his weathered face unusually tense. "Alara Whitcomb," he said. "By order of Alpha King Callan Rookwood, every unmated wolf remains under royal authority until the inquiry is concluded." Mara instinctively stepped between them. She has already suffered enough. Gideon met her eyes with quiet regret. This is no longer about Silverfang. The king believes something older has awakened. His gaze lingered briefly on Alara's collar before returning to her face. "Please come willingly." Alara inhaled slowly. She was exhausted, her heart still aching from Damon Veilcrest's rejection, but hiding had never changed anyone's opinion of her. "I will come," she said. Mara caught her hand. "Whatever happens in that hall, remember who you were before they told you who to be." The walk back felt strangely different. Pack members lined the streets in uneasy silence. Some stared openly. Others quickly looked away when Alara met their eyes. Word had already spread that the torches inside Moon Tribunal Hall had burned blue after her rejection. Rumors traveled faster than truth. As they reached the great stone staircase, Alara saw the royal banners for the first time. White wolves beneath silver crescents hung from every column. 2 rows of royal guards stood perfectly still, each warrior carrying himself with disciplined calm that made Silverfang's own soldiers appear restless by comparison. Inside the tribunal hall, the atmosphere had completely changed. No one spoke above a whisper. No one laughed. At the far end of the chamber stood Alpha King Callan Rookwood. He wore a dark formal coat fastened with polished silver clasps, his broad shoulders perfectly still beneath the torchlight. Tall, dark-haired, and impossibly composed, he seemed less like a man entering a room than a mountain deciding where the horizon would be. His silver eyes moved slowly across the gathered wolves, never lingering long, yet every alpha he looked at instinctively lowered his head. Even Damon Veilcrest stood with rigid posture, every trace of his earlier confidence carefully restrained beneath forced composure. Callan said nothing. He did not need to. Authority settled around him as naturally as moonlight settled over snow. Then, at last, his gaze reached Alara. He did not see the rejected Omega everyone else had spent the evening discussing. He studied her with quiet concentration, as though measuring something no one else in the room could perceive. Alara expected pity. She expected dismissal. Instead, she found simple attention. For reasons she could not explain, that frightened her more than either. Damon noticed the exchange immediately. "Your Majesty," he said, stepping forward with practiced confidence. "The tribunal has already concluded tonight's business." Callan's eyes never left Alara. "Has it?" The question was calm, yet every torch seemed to flicker lower. Elder Gideon approached with careful steps. "Your Majesty, the altar has begun responding." A servant rushed through the side entrance, breathing hard. His ceremonial robe was streaked with shimmering silver dust. "Elder," he gasped. "The glass moon altar, it is glowing again." This time no one dismissed the report. The hall fell completely silent. Callan finally shifted his gaze toward the elders. "Prepare the altar chamber," he ordered. "No one leaves." As the command echoed across the tribunal, Alara felt the pendant beneath her dress pulse once more, stronger than before. Across the room, Brielle Hartwick noticed the movement, and for the first time since the evening began, genuine fear replaced the perfect smile on her face. No one moved after Alpha King Callan Rookwood ordered the altar chamber prepared. The command settled over Moon Tribunal Hall like fresh snow, quiet but impossible to ignore. Yet silence did not erase pride. It only forced it to find another voice. Damon Veilcrest stepped into the center of the hall, forcing a respectful smile that never reached his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said evenly, "if the altar truly responds to something within Silverfang, then every possibility should be examined before sacred tradition is disturbed." Callan regarded him without expression. "Continue." Damon turned toward Alara. "Then let every secret be brought into the light." Hundreds of eyes followed him. Alara felt each stare settle on her shoulders like another stone to carry. Brielle Hartwick walked forward with graceful confidence, her pale blue gown whispering across the polished floor. She stopped only a few feet from Alara and offered a smile polished by years of court etiquette. "If you have nothing to hide," she said gently, "surely you would not object to standing before the tribunal." It sounded reasonable. That was what made it cruel. Without waiting for permission, two attendants rolled a narrow stone platform into the center of the chamber, the same place where honored families normally presented their heirs during royal ceremonies. Tonight it waited for the rejected Omega. Murmurs spread through the hall. Perhaps the moon chose the wrong wolf. Maybe she enchanted the altar. Look at her dress. She does not belong here. Alara climbed onto the platform because refusing would only feed their suspicions. Her faded blue dress suddenly felt older than it had that morning. Every loose thread seemed visible beneath the torchlight. She lifted her chin anyway. Across the hall, Mara Whitcomb closed her eyes in silent pain. Callan remained motionless, watching everything without interruption. Damon slowly circled the platform. "This is the Omega who expected to become Silverfang's Luna," he announced. "An Omega without influence, without standing, without a proper wolf." A few nervous laughs escaped the crowd. Others stayed silent, unwilling to test the king's patience. Brielle stepped closer, pretending to straighten a wrinkle near Alara's collar. Instead, her fingers caught the lunar thorn pendant beneath the fabric. "What a curious necklace," she murmured loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Surely something this ordinary cannot be worth hiding." Alara instinctively covered it. "It belonged to my mother." Brielle's smile sharpened almost invisibly. "Then let everyone admire it." Before Alara could stop her, Damon seized the chain and tore it free. The silver links snapped against Alara's neck. A thin sting spread across her skin, followed by the heavier ache of seeing the last gift from her mother dangling carelessly in another person's hand. Damon held it high. "This," he scoffed, "this worthless trinket is what frightened everyone." Brielle accepted the pendant between two delicate fingers, examining it with exaggerated disappointment. "It is barely fit for a servant." Soft laughter drifted through the hall. Someone near the back whispered, "Even her jewelry was rejected." Alara heard every word. She did not cry. She did not plead. She only looked at the pendant, remembering her mother's hands fastening it around her neck when she was too young to understand why it mattered. "Please," she said quietly, "give it back." Brielle tilted her head. "Ask properly." The silence that followed hurt more than the laughter. Dozens of alphas watched. Not one stepped forward. Damon looked away first. Whatever remained of the boy Alara had once trusted disappeared with that single choice. Something inside her settled instead of breaking. She met Brielle's eyes. "You may mock me," she said softly, "but you will not make my mother's memory small enough to satisfy your pride." Before Brielle could answer, a frightened cry echoed from the corridor leading to the altar chamber. A small white wolf pup stumbled into the hall, one front leg twisted beneath him, silver ceremonial markings smeared across his fur. The attendants recoiled. Several nobles instinctively stepped backward to protect their fine clothes. The pendant slipped from Brielle's hand and struck the stone floor. The instant moonlight touched the silver thorn, it unfolded like the first flower of spring. Alara did not hesitate. She stepped down from the platform everyone had used to shame her and ran toward the wounded pup, while every alpha watched in stunned silence. The pup's frightened whimper cut through every rank and title in the hall. Alara did not ask whose child he was, or why ceremonial paint streaked his white fur like moonlit ash. She only saw the tremble in his small body, the awkward bend of his leg, the way his amber eyes searched the room and found no mercy among wolves who called themselves strong. "Do not touch it," Damon snapped. "That pup came from the altar chamber. It may be carrying whatever awakened the stone." Alara looked up at him, still kneeling. "He is hurt." "It is an animal in wolf form," Brielle said, her voice tight. "One of the altar attendants can handle it." But none of them moved. The pup tried to crawl, then cried out softly and collapsed against the polished floor. Something in Alara's chest answered that sound, deeper than pity, older than fear. She reached for him. Elder Gideon's staff struck the ground. "Alara, stop." The chamber was sealed for a reason. If the altar has opened, any contact before the rite could bind you to consequences you do not understand. Mara's warning returned to her. "Fear may keep you alive tonight." Alara's hands hovered inches above the pup's fur. She could still choose safety. She could stand, let stronger wolves pretend caution was wisdom, and walk back into the shadows where no one expected anything from her. But the pup's breath fluttered beneath his ribs, shallow and uneven. and Alara knew with sudden clarity that the world had taught her to survive by becoming small, not by becoming right. "Then let the consequences begin with me," she said. She gathered the pup against her lap. A shock of cold ran through her palms, followed by pain so sharp she nearly dropped him. Not his pain alone, the altar's fear, the child's terror, the echo of every cruel voice that had filled the hall. It flooded her all at once, and Alara bent over him, gasping. Callan took one step forward, but stopped when silver light spilled between her fingers. The lunar thorn pendant lay open at her knees, its crescent petals unfolding around a tiny blue-white flame. Moonlight poured from the black glass ceiling though no window had opened. It touched Alara's bowed head, turning her ash-brown hair almost silver. The pup stilled. Under her hands, the twisted leg eased back into place with a soft shimmer, not violent, not unnatural, but gentle, as if the body had remembered how it was meant to be. The scrape along his side closed. His breathing steadied. A sound moved through the court, not applause, not fear, but disbelief. Alara felt the healing take something from her. Warmth drained from her limbs. Her vision dimmed around the edges. Still, she held on until the pup lifted his head and pressed his nose to her wrist. There, beneath her skin, a faint crescent mark appeared, pale as frost. Elder Gideon staggered back. That mark has not been seen in 300 years. Damon's face lost all color. "This is a trick." His voice cracked on the last word. Brielle stared at the pendant as though it had betrayed her personally. Alara tried to stand, but her knees failed. Before she struck the floor, Callan was there. He caught her with one arm, steady and careful, his presence surrounding her without taking anything from her. Up close, his silver eyes were not cold. They were furious, but not at her. "You chose a wounded child over your own safety," he said quietly. Alara's breath shook. Someone had to. The pup turned toward Callan and gave a weak, familiar chirp. For the first time all night, the Alpha King's control fractured. His hand lowered to the pup's head with unmistakable tenderness. The hall understood before anyone explained. This was no random altar creature. This was someone royal enough to make the king's face go still with relief. Callan looked from the healed pup to Alara, then to every alpha watching in stunned silence. "Seal the doors," he ordered. "No one leaves until the glass moon altar gives its answer." Alara looked down at the crescent glowing on her wrist and knew her old life had ended. The heavy doors of the altar chamber closed behind Alara Whitcomb with a low echo that seemed to seal the rest of the world outside. Only a handful of people remained within. Alpha King Callan Rookwood, Elder Gideon Ashfall, Mara Whitcomb, Damon Veilcrest, Brielle Hartwick, Prince Rowan, and the royal guards who stood silently along the walls. In the center of the chamber rested the glass moon altar. It rose from the stone floor like a single piece of frozen moonlight, clear as crystal, its silver veins slowly awakening beneath the surface. The crescent on Alara's wrist answered first. Soft light spread beneath her skin, pulsing in the same quiet rhythm as the altar itself. No one spoke. Even Damon seemed unwilling to disturb whatever ancient force had begun to stir. Elder Gideon stepped forward carrying the lunar thorn bracelet, his weathered hands unusually careful. "The altar remembers what wolves forget," he said quietly. "It does not judge titles. It remembers truth." He placed the living silver beside the crystal altar. The instant metal touched glass, the chamber disappeared beneath flowing moonlight. No blinding flash came. Instead, memories unfolded gently around them, as though the walls themselves had become living reflections. Alara saw White Pine Forest years before she was born. Snow drifted between towering pines while a young woman with ash-brown hair gathered herbs beneath the full moon. Adeline Whitcomb smiled as another woman approached through the trees. "Mara." They laughed together before the vision shifted. Wolves wearing noble crests searched nearby with drawn blades. Their voices carried through the frozen air. "Find the moon veil, child. The bloodline cannot disappear." Adeline clutched a tiny infant wrapped in pale blue cloth. She kissed the child's forehead before slipping the lunar thorn pendant over her neck. "Live quietly," she whispered through tears. "Please, live long enough to choose your own future." The vision dissolved into silver mist. Alara felt tears she had not realized were falling. Across the chamber, Mara covered her mouth, seeing the memory exactly as it had happened. She never stopped running, Mara whispered. Not because she feared death, because she feared someone would mistake your gift for something they could own. No one answered. Even Damon lowered his eyes. The altar had stolen every easy excuse from the room. Callan stepped beside Alara without touching her. Your mother protected a child, he said softly. Not a weapon. Alara looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Then why does everyone seem afraid of what I am? Callan held her gaze. Because frightened people often call compassion weakness until compassion becomes stronger than they are. Before she could answer, the altar brightened again. This time no memories appeared. Only a single pathway of silver light stretched across the crystal surface, ending where Alara stood. Elder Gideon slowly knelt. His moonbone staff slipped from his fingers and rested against the stone floor. 3 centuries, he whispered. The path of recognition has not appeared for 300 years. Brielle took an involuntary step backward. Damon remained perfectly still, his face drained of certainty. Prince Rowan quietly walked to Alara's side and slipped his small hand into hers without hesitation. The simple gesture carried more truth than any speech. The silver pathway widened until it surrounded Alara completely. Above the altar, moonlight gathered into a graceful silhouette, not yet fully formed, but unmistakably alive. The chamber filled with a peace so profound that no wolf dared interrupt it. Alara drew one slow breath as the warmth around her deepened. Somewhere within the light, a woman's voice spoke only 2 words, gentle enough to sound like home. Welcome back. Every soul in the chamber instinctively bowed their head, because before the figure had even taken shape, they already knew the moon goddess had come. The moment Alara Whitcomb placed her hand upon the glass moon altar, every sound inside the chamber disappeared. The torches stopped crackling. The wind beyond the stone walls fell silent. Even frightened breathing seemed to vanish beneath an ancient stillness that belonged to no living creature. Clear light spread beneath the altar like moonlight flowing through frozen water. It climbed around Alara's fingers, her wrist, and the silver crescent that had appeared after she healed Prince Rowan. She expected pain. Instead, she felt memories that had never belonged to her. A young woman with ash-brown hair running through white pine forest beneath a blood moon. Mara Whitcomb burying weathered scrolls beneath loose floorboards while tears blurred her sight. Adeline Whitcomb fastening the lunar thorn pendant around a sleeping child's neck before whispering, "Grow kind before you grow powerful." The vision dissolved. Alara opened her eyes to find everyone watching her. Damon Veilcrest's confidence had cracked into disbelief. Brielle Hartwick stood motionless, her hands trembling against her gown. Elder Gideon Ashfall had fallen to one knee without realizing it. Above the altar, silver mist slowly gathered until it formed the graceful outline of a woman crowned by living moonlight. No face could fully contain her beauty because it seemed to change with every heartbeat, becoming whatever each soul had forgotten to hope for. Every wolf in the chamber lowered their head instinctively. Even Alpha King Callan Rookwood bowed, one hand resting over his heart. No command had been spoken. Reverence needed none. The moon goddess Selene looked only at Alara. There was no triumph in her gaze, only infinite tenderness. "You have carried what others abandoned," she said softly. "You answered pain with mercy when no one promised you kindness in return." Tears slipped down Alara's face before she noticed them. "I am only an Omega," she whispered. Selene's smile held both sorrow and joy. "That was never your name." The words settled over the chamber more heavily than thunder. Brielle suddenly rushed toward the altar, desperation replacing elegance. She seized the silver moon vessel from its pedestal as though she could stop destiny with frightened hands. "No," she cried. "She cannot be chosen. She has nothing." The vessel darkened instantly. Its silver glow vanished. Brielle gasped and released it. The bowl struck the stone and rolled gently across the floor until it rested against Alara's feet. Damon reached toward Brielle but stopped halfway, staring at her as though seeing ambition stripped of every beautiful disguise. Selene never looked at either of them. "Hearts reveal themselves when light arrives," she said. Alara bent slowly and lifted the moon vessel with both hands. It grew warm against her palms, brightening until soft silver light flowed across the altar once more. She looked toward Callan, toward Mara, toward frightened little Prince Rowan standing close beside the king, then finally toward the hundreds of wolves gathered beyond the chamber doors. They had watched her be rejected. They had watched her be mocked. Now they waited to see whether she would become another ruler who answered hurt with power. Alara drew one steady breath. "If I accept this path," she said quietly, "then no child should ever believe kindness makes them weak. No Omega should ever stand alone because others call them small. If I am worthy of anything, let it be because I remember what it felt like to have no one stand beside me." Moonlight poured from the ceiling in a single radiant column. The lunar thorn pendant lifted from the altar and wrapped itself around Alara's wrist, its silver branches blooming into a living bracelet. At the same instant, a luminous crescent appeared above her heart, glowing gently through the fabric of her dress. Celine's voice echoed one final time, carrying beyond the chamber into every corner of Moon Tribunal Hall. "My heir is not the strongest. My heir is the one who remembered mercy." The goddess dissolved into countless silver petals that drifted through the air before fading into light. No applause followed. No cheers. Only complete silence. Because every alpha in the kingdom understood at the same impossible moment that everything they believed about greatness had just been rewritten. For several long seconds after the moon goddess disappeared, no one in the altar chamber remembered how to breathe. Silver petals drifted through the air before dissolving into morning light, leaving only the gentle crescent glowing above Alara Whitcomb's heart. She stood exactly where Celine had left her, one hand resting against the lunar thorn bracelet, almost as if she expected to wake and discover the entire night had been a dream. Instead, reality answered her in the quietest way imaginable. One by one, alphas lowered their heads. An elder released the ceremonial sword he had carried for decades, letting it rest harmlessly against the stone floor. A young warrior who had laughed during the rejection ceremony took a slow step backward, unable to meet Alara's eyes. Others simply stood motionless, every certainty they had carried into the tribunal undone by a single act of divine mercy. No order had been given. No punishment had been threatened. The silence itself had become obedience. Alara looked across the chamber, bewildered more than triumphant. Only hours earlier these same faces had watched her humiliation without speaking. Now not one voice dared challenge what they had witnessed. She did not feel taller. She did not feel greater. She only felt the weight of being seen for the first time. Beside her, Prince Rowan slipped his small hand into hers again, smiling with the complete trust only children possess. Alara smiled back through tears. Callan Rookwood watched the moment quietly. It reminded him that kingdoms were not protected only by strength, but by those who made frightened children feel safe. Across the chamber, Damon Veilcrest remained frozen where he stood. His eyes lingered on Alara, but they were no longer seeing the woman before him. They were seeing memories. Alara carrying food to injured workers after winter storms. Alara sitting awake through long nights beside sick wolf pups while stronger wolves slept. Alara thanking servants who had nothing to give her except tired smiles. A lifetime of quiet kindness he had never considered valuable. Regret settled across his face with a heaviness no title could lift. Brielle Hartwick lowered herself slowly to her knees, not because anyone demanded it, but because ambition had finally become too heavy to carry. "I spent so much time trying to be chosen," she whispered. "I never learned how to become worthy." Alara crossed the chamber until she stood before her. There was no anger left inside her. The journey through the altar had taken even that. "Worth was never something another person could hand you," Alara said gently. "It grows from the choices you make after your worst mistake." Brielle closed her eyes, tears falling silently onto the stone floor. Nearby, Elder Gideon removed the moonbone staff from beneath his arm and bowed deeply before Alara. "I protected traditions long after they stopped protecting people," he said. "May the next generation remember the difference." Mara Whitcomb could no longer remain where she stood. She hurried forward and wrapped Alara in a trembling embrace. For years she had hidden truth to keep her niece alive. Now she finally held her without secrets between them. "Your mother would be proud," she whispered through tears. "She already was," Alara answered softly. Across the chamber, Callan stepped forward until he stood only a few feet away. Slowly, deliberately, the Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. Every guard followed. Then every elder. Then every alpha who filled the tribunal hall beyond the open doors. No command was spoken. Respect moved through the kingdom faster than fear ever had. Callan lifted his eyes to Alara. "Not as your ruler," he said quietly, "as the first to recognize what the moon goddess has already declared. Selene's heir stands above my authority and under my protection." Alara's breath caught. Beyond the open doors, hundreds of alphas remained bowed in absolute silence. No one argued. No one protested. No one searched for excuses. The silence spread from one end of Moon Tribunal Hall to the other until it felt as vast as the dawn itself, carrying only one undeniable truth into the waiting morning. The rejected Omega would never again stand alone. Morning light poured through the black glass roof of Moon Tribunal Hall, washing away the silver glow that had filled the chamber only moments before. Yet no one moved. Hundreds of wolves remained exactly where they stood, as though the night itself had asked them to witness one final truth before releasing them back into the world. Elder Gideon Ashfall stepped forward carrying the restored lunar records in both hands. His voice, once rigid with tradition, now carried the quiet humility of a man who had finally learned the difference between law and justice. "Before the moon goddess and the realm," he declared, "the tribunal recognizes Alara Whitcomb, daughter of Adeline Whitcomb of the Hidden Moonvale line, as the rightful heir chosen by Selene." No cheers answered him. None were needed. Every alpha in the hall lowered his head. Some closed their eyes. Others simply stood frozen, unable to escape the weight of everything they had believed only hours before. Damon Veilcrest remained motionless near the front of the chamber. The pride that had once filled every word he spoke had disappeared, leaving only a man forced to look honestly at himself. He walked toward Alara without the confidence of an alpha, but with the hesitation of someone carrying regret too heavy to hide. "I thought strength meant standing above people," he said quietly. "I never realized real strength was the person I kept asking to stand beneath me." Alara looked at him for a long moment. She remembered the frightened young woman she had been when his rejection shattered the last hope she had carried into the tribunal. She remembered the lonely walk home, Mara's tears, the wounded Prince Rowan, and the moment mercy had felt more important than fear. Those memories no longer hurt the same way. They had become part of the road instead of the chain. "You cannot return what was taken," she answered gently. "But you can become someone who never does it to another soul again." Damon lowered his head, accepting the judgment without another word. Nearby, Brielle Hartwick stepped forward next. There was no polished smile left, no practiced elegance. "I spent my whole life believing I had to compete for worth," she whispered. "I forgot that kindness was worth more than being chosen." Alara reached out and placed the lunar thorn bracelet against her own heart for a brief moment before speaking. "Then begin there." It was not forgiveness offered cheaply. It was permission to change. Elder Gideon formally removed Damon from leadership of Silverfang until he proved himself through service rather than authority, while Brielle was placed under tribunal guidance to answer for her choices and rebuild the trust she had broken. Neither sentence was born from vengeance. Both carried the hope that justice could restore instead of simply destroy. Mara Whitcomb approached last. Without speaking, she embraced Alara, and for the first time since her mother's death, Alara allowed herself to cry without shame. Across the hall, Prince Rowan laughed softly as he shifted back into his human form, healthy and smiling, then ran to take Alara's hand as naturally as if he had always known her. Callan Rookwood watched the scene in thoughtful silence before walking toward her. He did not kneel because she needed honor. She already possessed it. Instead, he offered his hand with quiet respect. "Walk beside me," he said, "never behind me." Alara smiled, placing her hand in his by her own choice. Together they stepped through the great tribunal doors into the morning sun. Behind them, hundreds of alphas remained standing in complete silence. Not one questioned the moon goddess. Not one challenged her choice. Not one voice dared call the rejected Omega weak again. Their silence became the final judgment, spoken more powerfully than any oath ever could. And as the first warm light of a new day spread across Silverfang, Alara Whitcomb understood that Selene had never chosen her because she was the strongest wolf in the kingdom. She had been chosen because, when the world taught her cruelty, she answered with mercy. In the end, that was the inheritance no throne could ever equal.